Zia sat alone at the small table in the quiet restaurant, her eyes glued to the door. Every time it opened, her heart jumped, hoping it was Malik, but each time, it was someone else. She smiled politely, then looked down again. The waitress kept coming by, asking gently if she wanted to order. Zia said she'd wait a little longer. The glass of water in front of her had been filled 3 times, but she hadn't taken a single sip. It was their anniversary. She had even worn the blue dress Malik once said made her look like a dream. She had picked this place because it was where they had their first date. But now, as the clock ticked past the 2nd hour, reality began to set in. People around her laughed, clinked glasses, shared meals, but Zia sat in silence, alone, no text, no call, nothing. Her phone stayed blank. She refreshed her messages again and again, hoping maybe he was stuck in traffic, or maybe he had a good reason. But deep down, her chest already felt heavy. Something was wrong. This wasn't like Malik. Or maybe it was. Maybe she just hadn't seen it before. Finally, after 2 long hours of waiting, she picked up her purse, stood slowly, and walked out with shaky steps. The waitress gave her a soft smile, the kind people give when they feel sorry for you. Zia didn't cry. Not yet. Her heart was too numb. She didn't know the real reason Malik never showed up. She didn't know about the conversation he had with his mother earlier that day. Madame Ijoma had told him Zia was not good enough. She had reminded him of Zia's father's unpaid debts, her family's struggles, and said he deserved someone better, someone from a higher class. Malik, who once promised Zia the world, had listened, and instead of standing up for her, he simply disappeared. Zia left the restaurant that night feeling invisible, not just stood up, but thrown away. But what she didn't know was that this pain was planting something inside her, a quiet strength, a silent fire, and even though she didn't see it yet, her story was far from over. A few days after the restaurant heartbreak, Zia's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She picked it up, and to her surprise, it was Malik's mother, Madame Ijoma. Her voice was calm but firm. She said she wanted to have a private talk with Zia. For a moment, Zia felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe this was a chance to clear the air. Maybe Malik's mother wanted to understand her better, or even apologize, so she agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe the next morning. Zia dressed simply, with her natural hair pulled back, and a soft smile on her face. She wanted to make a good impression. When she arrived, Madame Ijeoma was already seated, looking sharp and serious, like a queen on her throne. Zia sat down politely, greeted her with respect, and waited. At first, the older woman said nothing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a brown envelope. Then she slowly placed the contents on the table, one by one. Zia stared, confused. There were papers, documents she recognized, a copy of her father's unpaid loans, a printout of her older brother's past arrest, even a list showing her family's earnings, where they lived, and what they owned. It felt cold, like a report card of her entire life. Then, Madame Ijoma spoke. "You see, my dear," she said smoothly, "this is not about love. This is about future, status, class. You come from nothing, and my son, he is not meant to marry someone like you." Zia sat still, her hands shaking slightly under the table. Her mouth was dry, but her face stayed calm. "You are not one of us," Madame Ijoma said, "and you never will be. So let's stop this dream before it becomes a mistake." For a second, there was silence, just the quiet hum of the cafe in the background. Zia didn't beg. She didn't try to explain. She looked into the older woman's eyes, nodded once and whispered, "Thank you for your honesty." Then, with grace, she stood up, held her head high and walked out. She didn't cry, not in front of her, not there, but something inside her shifted. She felt pain, yes, but also something stronger than pain, a quiet fire, a voice inside her that said, "I will rise." And from that moment, Zia stopped trying to prove herself to anyone. She knew she had nothing to be ashamed of, and one day, they would all see what she was truly worth. After that painful meeting with Malik's mother, Zia waited. She hoped Malik would call. She hoped he would stand up for her, ask what had happened, or at least try to understand. But instead, there was nothing. Total silence. Days passed, then weeks. She sent him messages, kind, honest ones, not to beg, just to talk. But he never replied. She checked to see if he read them. But soon, even that stopped. One day, she realized she had been blocked on every platform. No call, no explanation, no goodbye, just silence. Zia sat alone in her room, staring at her phone. She wanted to feel surprised, but deep down, she wasn't. It hurt, of course. This was someone she had loved with all her heart, someone she trusted. But now, he was gone like she never mattered. No fight, no loyalty, no defense. He had chosen his mother's opinion over their love, and that choice was loud enough, even without words. She didn't scream. She didn't cry loudly or break things. She just sat there for a long time, holding on to that deep, heavy silence. And slowly, she started to accept what was happening. She had lost Malik, not because she wasn't enough, but because he wasn't strong enough to fight for her. So she did what strong women do. She let him go. Zia didn't tell anyone. She didn't post anything online. She simply picked up the broken pieces of her heart and packed them gently, like someone folding old clothes and putting them away. She kept her pain private. She didn't want pity. She didn't want people to know she had been left behind like that. But while she stayed quiet on the outside, something deep inside her had changed. She didn't feel like the same girl who used to hope for love and beg to be accepted. She was tired, not angry, but awake. Something inside her had opened, not a need to get revenge, just a strong, clear understanding. She had been waiting for someone who didn't have the courage to choose her, and now she was done waiting. Zia looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes looked sad but stronger. There was no more confusion, no more wondering what she did wrong. She knew it wasn't her fault. She had loved deeply. She had been honest. She had tried, and that was enough. Now, it was time to stop looking back. She turned off her phone, took a deep breath, and told herself quietly, "You will rise. You will shine, with or without him." And from that moment on, she began to walk forward, with quiet strength and a heart ready for something greater. 3 months had passed since Zia last heard from Malik. 3 months of silence, healing, and slow rebuilding. She didn't have much, just strength, hope, and a quiet fire inside her. One morning, she stood in front of a small mirror, adjusting the collar of an old suit she found in a thrift store. Her shoes didn't fit perfectly. She had borrowed them from her cousin, but none of that mattered. Today was different. Today was her chance to start fresh. Zia walked into the office building with nervous steps but steady eyes. The walls were clean, the air cool, and everything felt serious. It was a big company, a rising fintech firm everyone in the city talked about. Getting a job here could change everything. She sat in the waiting area, heart pounding, fingers locked tightly together. When they called her name, she stood tall, took a deep breath, and stepped into the interview room. There, behind a large desk, sat a man with a sharp look and calm smile. Mr. Tunde Ola. He was the CEO himself. That surprised Zia. CEOs don't usually interview people like her, young, unknown, and still trying to stand again. He looked at her resume, then looked up. His eyes weren't cold. They were curious. Then he asked something that stopped her heart for a second. "Tell me who you are," he said, "without telling me what you've survived." Zia blinked. She had prepared to talk about her struggles, the heartbreak, the rejection, the pain of losing love and dignity. But here was someone asking to see her, not her past, not her pain, just her. She smiled, and slowly, with simple, honest words, Zia spoke. She told him about her love for solving problems, how she once ran a small online store to pay her school fees, how she helped her neighbors with basic computer work. She talked about her dreams, her hunger to learn, and how she wanted to grow, not for revenge, but for herself. Mr. Tunde listened carefully, nodding from time to time. At the end of it, he stood up, shook her hand, and said, "We need someone like you." She got the job, but that wasn't all. Over the next few weeks, Zia proved herself. She worked hard, stayed late, learned fast, and helped fix problems that even older staff couldn't. People began to notice her, even Mr. Tunde. He called her into his office one day and said, "Zia, there's something different about you. You don't give up." Zia just smiled again. She didn't need to tell him why. Her story was already shining through her work, her energy, her heart. That interview didn't just give her a job. It gave her a new beginning, a new version of herself, a life she never thought possible. And this time, no one could stop her. Zia gave everything to her new job. She came early, stayed late, and never complained. While others took breaks and chatted, she focused. Her work was clean, fast, and full of good ideas. She didn't do it to impress anyone. She just wanted to grow, to prove to herself that she was worth more than what life had thrown at her. What Zia didn't know was that her boss, Mr. Tunde Ola, had been noticing her, not just her work, but her attitude, her calm way of solving problems, her kind words to colleagues, and the quiet strength in her eyes. He didn't say much at first, just watched, but deep down, he respected her more and more each day. One evening, it was getting late. The office was almost empty. Zia was still working on a report. Tunde too was finishing something on his laptop. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, gently, he asked, "Do you ever feel like your past keeps chasing you?" Zia looked up, surprised. The question hit her in a deep place, but instead of pain, she felt a strange calm. And then, for the first time in a long while, she laughed, not the fake kind, a real soft laugh from her heart. She said, "All the time, but I'm learning to walk faster." Tunde smiled. That moment opened a door. From that night, things began to change. They started talking more. One evening turned into dinner. Dinner turned into walks after work, then long drives through the quiet city. They spoke about life, dreams, fears, and little things. There was no rush, no pressure, just a slow, natural bond growing between two people who had been through pain but still chose to believe in something better. Tunde never treated her like someone he had power over. He saw her as an equal, someone with a fire in her heart and grace in her steps. Zia, too, found something in Tunde's presence, a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still hard days, busy deadlines, and moments of doubt, but through it all, something soft and steady grew between them. And for the first time, Zia felt seen, not for her past, not for her pain, but for the woman she was becoming. It wasn't just love, it was healing, quiet, real, and beautiful. Months had passed since Zia started her new job and slowly built a new life. Her heart was healed, her smile came easier, and with Tunde by her side, she felt safe, valued, and deeply loved. Then, one calm evening, on a quiet, private beach, under a sky full of stars, Tunde knelt down and held out a simple but beautiful ring. He looked into her eyes and said, "Zia, will you marry me?" Zia's hands shook and tears filled her eyes. So much had happened, so much pain, but now, so much peace. She whispered, "Yes," with all her heart. They spent the next weeks planning quietly. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about building a new chapter, a fresh start with someone who saw her worth. Then came a corporate dinner. Tunde had to attend as CEO, and he invited Zia to come along. She wore a simple dress and walked in confidently beside him. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. As Tunde greeted some older guests, one couple stood frozen. Zia turned, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Madame Ijoma, Malik's mother, the woman who once printed her family's shame and told her, to her face, she wasn't good enough. Now, here she was, dressed in gold lace, holding her husband's arm tightly. Her eyes widened, and she leaned close to her husband's ear, whispering sharply, "That's the girl. That's the one I told you wasn't good enough." Zia heard it, clear as day, but this time, it didn't hurt. She didn't shrink. She didn't shake. She stood tall, graceful, and calm, because this time, she wasn't just that girl. She was the fiancée of the man who now signed Malik's paycheck. She was the future wife of a CEO. She was no longer the girl they looked down on. She was the woman they'd now have to look up to. Madame Ijoma looked stunned. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Zia met her eyes just for a moment, not with pride, not with revenge, but with peace. She smiled gently and turned back to Tunde, who reached for her hand and held it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Zia had no need to say a word. Her life, her growth, her joy, they spoke for her. She had become everything they said she couldn't, and more. At the dinner, after the shock of seeing Zia, Madame Ijoma could not hold herself back. She waited for the perfect moment and then quickly pulled Tunde aside, her face tense, her voice low and shaking with worry. "You can't marry her," she whispered sharply. "This is madness." Tunde turned to face her fully, calm and unbothered. He looked her straight in the eyes and replied gently but firmly, "You don't understand who she is, but I do, and that's exactly why I'm marrying her." His voice was steady, sure, full of love and pride. Madame Ijoma stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. She had expected Tunde to be shocked, to be angry, maybe to reconsider, but instead, he defended Zia without a second thought. That wasn't something she was used to. She had always been the one in control, giving orders, deciding who was good enough for her family. But not this time. Malik was standing just a few feet away. He had been watching everything silently. When he saw his mother whispering to his boss, he moved a little closer, just enough to hear the words. His face slowly changed as he realized what was happening. He hadn't known. He hadn't imagined that the woman he once left behind, the same woman his mother said was not worthy, would one day be standing beside the man he now worked for. And not just beside him, loved by him, chosen by him. Malik looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. His eyes searched Zia's face, but she didn't look his way. She stood beside Tunda with quiet strength, not needing revenge or harsh words. Her presence was enough. Her growth was loud enough. Tunda reached for her hand in front of everyone. He didn't care who was watching. He smiled at her with full respect in his eyes, and Zia smiled back, calm and beautiful. Madame Ijeoma slowly stepped back, realizing the fight was over before it even began. It was already too late. Zia had become the woman no one thought she could be, and now she was going to marry a man who truly knew her worth, while the people who once judged her could only stand and watch. The wedding day finally came, and it was like a beautiful dream. Not too loud, not too crowded, just perfect. The hall was filled with soft lights, fresh flowers, and warm smiles. It wasn't a big show, but every little detail spoke of love, peace, and dignity. Zia looked like a queen in her golden lace dress. Her steps were calm, her back straight, and her heart full. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. She was walking towards a man who chose her without shame, without delay. As she walked down the aisle, all eyes were on her, but one pair of eyes stayed wide and stiff. Madame Ijeoma's. She sat beside her husband, frozen in silence. Her mouth moved slowly, as if the truth had only now hit her. "She could have been our daughter-in-law," she whispered, barely believing her own words. Her husband looked at Zia, then at their son Malik sitting quietly nearby. Without turning his head, he replied softly, "She still is, just not in the way you hoped." Those words landed hard. Malik sat a few rows away. His suit was sharp, but his face was full of hidden pain. He had no choice but to attend the wedding. His boss, Tunde, was the groom after all. As Zia walked past him, she didn't glance his way, not even once. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. It said, "I'm no longer that girl waiting for you." And then she reached Tunde, her peace, her partner, her answered prayer. Tunde looked at her like she was the most precious person in the world. The way he held her hand, the way he smiled at her, it was clear. This was real love, not forced, not hidden, not controlled by status or fear. Zia didn't have to fight to be seen anymore. She didn't have to prove herself to anyone. As they exchanged vows, some eyes in the room were wet with tears, others with regret. Two families sat on opposite sides, one still clinging to pride, the other quietly proud of the woman Zia had become. And when Tunde kissed her, it felt like the closing of one chapter and the beautiful beginning of another. A love that didn't ask her to shrink, a love that saw her and stayed. Zia didn't just get married, she made history. At the wedding reception, the lights were soft and warm, and laughter filled the room. Everyone was eating, smiling, and celebrating the new couple. Then, Tunda stood up and took the microphone. The music stopped. All eyes turned to him. He looked at Zia with love in his eyes, then slowly turned to the guests. He cleared his throat gently and began to speak. "Zia wasn't born into wealth," he said, his voice calm but strong. "But she carries more grace, more loyalty, and more wisdom than most daughters of billionaires I've ever met." The room went quiet. People listened closely. "She wasn't too little," he continued, looking around the hall. The people around her were just too blind to see her value. Some guests nodded. Others looked surprised, but many clapped. The applause started slow but soon filled the entire room. Zia sat there, smiling softly, her heart full. For so long, she had felt invisible, judged for where she came from, not who she was. But now, in front of everyone, the man she loved was speaking the truth out loud. Across the room, Madame Ijeoma sat stiff in her chair. Her hands were tight around her wine glass. Her face showed no smile, only quiet shock. Her pride, which once made her push Zia away, now sat heavy on her shoulders like a burden she couldn't lift. She had spent so much time thinking Zia wasn't enough for her son, but now Zia wasn't just enough. She was more. She was the one her son had lost, and her son's boss had won. Malik sat beside his mother, quiet and full of regret. He couldn't even look up. Tunda turned back to Zia. He smiled at her in front of everyone. Then he said the words that touched her soul deeply. You were never not enough. You were just in the wrong room. Zia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She smiled, strong and proud. In that moment, she felt something she had waited years to feel. Seen, heard, loved, and respected. Not for pretending to be someone else, but for being fully herself. The crowd cheered again, but Zia wasn't listening anymore. Her heart was too full. She knew this moment would stay with her forever, not just because of what Tunda said, but because it reminded her that her worth was never missing. The right people just hadn't seen it yet. Now they had. Zia never went back to mock anyone. She didn't brag. She didn't remind people of how they treated her. She didn't post long messages about her success just to prove a point, number. She simply lived her life quietly, gracefully, and with purpose. She had nothing to prove anymore. The world could see it on its own. Madame Ijoma, though, couldn't avoid the reminders. Every time she opened a newspaper or scrolled through her phone, there was Zia's name. Mrs. Zia Ola, the headline would say. Sometimes it was about the new branch of her global women's fund that was helping thousands of girls. Other times, it was about her being invited to speak at major events, sitting beside presidents and CEOs. The same girl Madame Ijoma once said wasn't good enough, was now being celebrated around the world. And then, there was Malik, her son, the man who once blocked Zia without a word. Now he worked at Tundiola's company, reporting to Zia's husband. Every time he got an email signed Zio, executive director, he felt it, that heavy mix of shame and regret. He never told his mother how it stung. He didn't have to. She already knew. But Zia never rubbed it in. Not once. She never looked back to say, I told you so. Instead, she focused on her mission, on the women she was helping, the girls she was mentoring, the homes she was building. Her life wasn't about revenge. It was about rising, quietly, powerfully, and without apology. She and Tundi became the kind of couple people admired. They walked hand in hand, supported each other loudly, and showed the world that love doesn't come from the perfect background. It comes from mutual respect and honesty. Zia had finally found what she had once begged for, to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved without condition. But she got even more. She got peace. She got purpose. She got elevation. And every time she walked into a room, dressed with confidence, speaking with wisdom, she didn't need to say a word. Her presence was the proof. Her success was the message. She didn't need to get even with anyone. She just kept rising. If this story moved you, don't just scroll, like, share, and comment. She rose to let the world know that no one can block what's meant for you. Tag someone who needs this reminder. You are never too small. Maybe you're just in the wrong room.